Well, I want to welcome you to this lecture on the way of things. This lecture is going to be on a phenomena known as a sky island. Now, a sky island is usually a mountain that's at least 3,000 or 4,000 feet above the surrounding area. An example of that, if a mountain is 6,000 foot tall, but the majority of it is standing free 4,000 foot, so that the 6,000 foot above sea level with a 4,000 foot chunk of mountain above the surrounding area. That would qualify as a sky island. Now, sky islands are unique in the Mojave Desert or any of the southwestern deserts because of a phenomena where you drop about 5 degrees per 1,000 foot of elevation gain. Now, different people say, well, it's 3 degrees or this or that, but suffice to say that you're going to get cooler temperatures as you go up. And this can be significant. If you have 4,000 foot of elevation gain, that can be as much as 20 degrees cooler. So the temperature on the valley floor could be 52 degrees, and at the top you're at 32 degrees, which means it's freezing, of course. And a freezing condition tends to conserve water. And that's really the key understanding, that as you go higher up, you get cooler temperatures and there's a greater degree of water conservation or moisture conservation. When we say water, you have to understand that we mean even the moisture in the ground. It doesn't have to be liquid water, but the moisture is what we're talking about primarily, because that's where most of the water is in the desert. It's not a liquid drinkable substance, but it's in the plants, it's in the moisture, it's even in the rocks at times. And believe me, rocks can hold quite a bit of moisture. So as we go up in this elevation, we get cooler temperatures and we get better water conservation. And a lot of times, though, we get more water. So really, we have to be careful in understanding that these sky islands are not just cooler. There's a whole spectrum of things that begin to happen that changes these sky islands into literally what they are, islands, where oftentimes animals and plants and insects and such live on these islands that they can't live elsewhere. They can't connect to others of their kind, or in some cases they're unique. A good example of this is the Panamint Mountains. They're a sky island. They have bristlecone pines at the top of them. They have deer. They can't connect with other deer. They're on that main ridge, and there's no place for them to go. And the pinon and juniper forest on that mountain range indicates a sky island because, again, they're up high and they cannot, the pinon and juniper cannot move out across the desert floor. So a lot of times we can see a sky island very well because of the plants and animals change, or the plants change, and you can see from miles away that in fact that mountain really qualifies as a sky island. However, when you get to these mountains that are this large, they sometimes take on other attributes that are unique. They have a rain shadow effect, that is, they'll push moisture and clouds up, higher up into the stratosphere, and cause their own weather pattern, cause a thunderstorm moving across the landscape. As it gets close to these sky islands, will oftentimes get disrupted in different ways where it rains right on the mountain. And so it not only does it preserve moisture, but it gets more moisture. And we can see this in different ways. If we take our mountain like so, and we'll just say this is 5,000 foot, and here's your valley floor, and this is maybe, we'll just say 1,500 feet elevation, and this is, I don't know, 6,000 or 7,000 foot. As we get further and further, of course, it gets cooler, but that's a very simplistic view of the Sky Island, because one of the things that these mountains also have, because they're so high, they both affect the wind, and they're high enough to get into winds that aren't down here. Down here might be just a normal, slightly breezy day, but as the wind comes and hits this mountain, it has to force its way up and over. So there's places on this mountain that are extremely windy, that have an intense wind, that down here lower you don't have. And that again is going to affect where snow falls. If you get a Sky Island and you get up here and you get snow, cracks and crevices and downwind pieces of it are going to get more snow than would otherwise be if there were no wind. So the wind effect becomes more intense often than a smaller mountain. And then we get the north-south slope situation that we have to always take into account. Again, whether it's a berm along the side of the road or a Sky Island. And so you might have a zone, if this is the sun over on this side, let's say, shining down on this side of the mountain. Well, yeah, this side is cooler. It is cooler than down here. So it will tend to hold moisture better. But this north slope is going to be a lot cooler, and it's going to be a huge piece of ground that is cooler. And so you might end up with a tree that can grow down here, say a pinon or a juniper, that really on this side of the mountain has to be way up here before it gets cool enough and that there's enough moisture being conserved, so that there's kind of that if you're looking at it from an east-west position, you might see a tree line that is at an angle, whereas if you're looking at it from this side, it would be a straight across tree line, or from the north side, if you're looking, it'll look straight across, but it's not straight across the mountain. The sun is having a huge effect. Another thing that Sky Islands tend to have, because they do manufacture weather more so than smaller mountains, is you can have winds coming down here because it's cooler and it's dropping into the valley, or updrafts and so on. A lot of times people that hang glide will play this kind of game, and they'll find out and figure out where some of these average winds are and how the shape of the mountain is working them. And of course you can often see it in the plants, whether it's dry or whether they're kind of flag shaped, and you get some idea as how the winds are working the Sky Island. Another thing about these bigger mountains, you have, because you have maybe let's say this is the first 1,000, and this is another 1,000, and here's yet another 1,000. Well, you're always going to still have this area down here, as we've talked in another lecture, that's going to be a very special place environmentally, as far as water and creeks, springs, and so forth. But because this mountain is so tall, this area here still has, even though you look at it from the overall mass of the mountain, it's relatively small, it's still 1,000 foot. And yes, that's big enough to have enough collection. If you have a canyon, say, going down here, and it's got feeders coming down, and then maybe some rock strata here that's just right, that has enough permeability and whatnot, that you end up with a spring way up here. And you think, wow, that's a high country spring, and it's beautiful and all that great stuff. You think it doesn't seem to fit in with the average idea of a spring generally being lower. Well, it's got 1,000 foot of mountain above it. So even though it's relatively close to the top of this 4,000 or 5,000 foot mountain, it's still got 1,000 foot, and sometimes 400 or 500 feet's enough, because there's so much more moisture up here that the odds get stacked for a spring to work at a higher altitude. So when you get into these sky islands, it's something to be aware of. You want to key into the vegetation or game trails or any other telltale signs that you might actually have a high country spring because you have such large scale mountains. And this is true of the North Slope, South Slope. You're dealing with the larger scale and the wind and so forth that make these things a place where I think plants that grow nowhere else, animals, and even populations of common animals that you wouldn't think of as particularly unique, they're still trapped on top of that island. They're still trapped there. And it's just one of the unique things that you see. Of course, this phenomena occurs all over the world, but in the desert, we use water to gauge the effect on life. In other parts of the world, it's more temperature and other things come into being. And these islands can be a ridge or a freestanding mountain. It's just something to be aware of the concept, and it'll help you understand the land as a whole, and that the size and the shape all come into being on a sky island. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and we'll see you again. Thank you.